My name is Johan, and many people here probably know me. I also have two colleagues that work with me at the Swedish registry, Eric and Leon, and they are less known, but they are much brighter than me. So now we see more results coming out of our work. We have a problem when it comes to encrypted transport for DNS. We sort of solved the problem for the last mile, from the stub resolver to the resolver, through DOH and various other things locally, but a very high fraction of the communication from the resolver to the public authoritative server is still unencrypted and therefore, well, susceptible to being intercepted or looked at, and we have privacy implications all over. We've talked about this for a very long time, but not very much has happened. We do have a couple of, let's call them, ongoing efforts and proposals for alleviating the situation. One is RFC 9539, which essentially says just try quick, or just try DOT. If it works, we're happy. If it doesn't work, just fall back to TCP or UDP as usual. The other one is DELEG, which I'm sure most of you know is a much larger effort trying to solve a number of problems, of which this is one. And at some point, I'm rather convinced that DELEG will solve this problem. The question is not so much whether it will solve the problem or not. The question is when, as in how long into the future do we have to wait until we actually have DELEG widely deployed? And sort of the follow-up question to that would be, how many questions, which is a very large number, will have to go in clear text while we're waiting for that? So this is not in any way against DELEG. I'm all in favor of DELEG. I'm only concerned about the deployment delays for DELEG. So I said most of this. That the problem with the blind probing is that it sort of isn't much used. That may change, but right now it isn't much used. And DELEG is sort of a much larger problem. We want to have something that works today. We want to have something that works without having as invasive changes to the DNS infrastructure as some of the other proposals. Because if it doesn't, well, then we essentially end up with the same problem definition as DELEG, and then we should just do DELEG and wait for that. Can we do something here and now? Well, let's see. Perhaps we can. We suggest the following. We reuse the initial suggestion for transport signaling from DELEG. Yes, I know that is sort of changing a bit back and forth now. And from my point of view, the intent here is to sort of try to track what DELEG is doing, not do something different. So we want to somehow signal what transports a particular authoritative name server supports. And we do that by having that particular authoritative name server add an SVCB record to the additional section when responding. So if I'm issuing a query for something and I send the query to ns.provider.example, this name server, this authoritative name server, is able to realize that I'm actually an authoritative server for this zone for which the query is about. I can just attach this SVCB to the additional section of my response. And we call this an opportunistic transport signal. This is my preference. I like quick most, and I want DOT second, and if neither of those are possible for the resolver, let's do standard DNS. It's obviously up to the resolver whether to use this or not, but if it chooses to use it, it can upgrade the next communication with this particular server to use, for instance, DOQ or something. Here's an example. I send a query to ns.provider.example. In the response, ns.provider.example is an authoritative name server for this zone. And given that, this particular name server is able to make the decision that I will attach this SVCB record to the response. And by doing that, I'm sending a signal to the resolver allowing the resolver to upgrade future communication between the two of us, if it so chooses. The good thing here is that it works both if the zone is signed or if it's unsigned. It works without changing anything in the DNS data for the child or for the zone that we're querying about. We don't do any changes in the parent of the zone, so essentially the ecosystem is unchanged. This is only a question of a signal between the authoritative server and the resolver. So it's entirely in the operational infrastructure of DNS. It's not in the hierarchy of DNS names or the delegation points or anything like that. So we're solving a much, much simpler problem here than, for instance, Deleg is trying to solve. And because it's much simpler, perhaps it's easier to deploy. On the other hand, there are drawbacks. It's opportunistic. It doesn't necessarily work. It could be that someone strips off this SVCB record on the way from the authoritative server to the recursive server. And because I cannot know that this SVCB record should be there, I cannot know that it has been stripped off. So it is opportunistic, it's not secure. On the other hand, while such things may happen, they typically will not happen for every single query and response pair. So the intent here is to improve privacy at large. The intent is not to provide any kind of guarantee of privacy for a particular name. And statistically, over millions and millions of queries, this will provide that in most cases, although it cannot provide it as a guarantee in any particular case. Another problem, of course, is that, sure, it isn't secure, but it is as secure as what we have today. So we're not losing anything compared to today, and we're gaining privacy if we choose to use this for a large fraction of the queries between resolvers and authoritative servers. There's an extra question, obviously, because the first question will use UDP or TCP as standard, and it will only be upgraded from the second question and onwards. Well, this also isn't really much of a problem, because typically there are very large authoritative servers here, and they see millions and millions of queries, and there are large resolvers out there, and they send millions and millions of queries. And that means that this extra cost for the first query, statistically, again, isn't much of an issue. Advantages. Well, I spoke about that a little bit. We do not change the DNS namespace. There are no parent changes. There are typically no child changes either. It's only a change in the authoritative server end, and if he wants to generate that dynamically, he can generate it dynamically, and then we actually have zero changes. So it's really in the operational part of this rather than in the namespace part of it. It's very, very simple to implement in the authoritative server. Simple enough that I could actually do it, and I did. It's less complicated, it's less simple to implement in the recursive end. Well, that's just how life is. Recursive servers are more complex, and adding multiple transports to recursive servers doesn't really make it any simpler. But it's exactly the same problem we already have. If we just want to do this blind probing RFC, we have the same problem of resolver complexity to track this. When we do Deleg, we also have exactly the same problem of tracking this, matching transports against servers, etc. So yes, it's more complicated, but it's a problem space that we need to investigate regardless. And the SVCB can be synthesized if needed. So if we compare this to Deleg, the major advantage here is to get privacy for a larger fraction of the traffic as soon as possible. A side benefit, or potential side benefit, let's see, is that we would get some early experience with transport signaling. That could turn out to show us that perhaps this was a really bad idea. And if it is a really bad idea, perhaps it's good to actually realize that this is a bad idea to do it this way before we do exactly the same thing with Deleg. So I have no indication that it should be a bad idea. I'm just saying, until we try this in some sort of scale, we sort of don't know. Compared to RFC 3573968, number that I cannot remember right now, the blind probing one, well, I need to be able to support a transport as opposed to only test a transport. The blind probing has a major problem when it comes to differentiating between something that I'm testing. I'm actually listening on the quick port, and this is now an advanced announced service. And that is something we cannot do without a signal. So we need a signal to be able to distinguish between testing phase and production phase, and we cannot do that any other way. And the last thing is that we need to be able to have a signal if we want to upgrade to something more secure. A signal can be upgraded. No signal, there is nothing to upgrade. And it seems that I'm out of time, so we can sort of close it here. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So I agree it's better than blind probing, but it still is, as a resolver implementer, I have to tackle that problem at some point. And I mean, it will be still tackling it twice because the DELEC stuff will be vastly different. So
If we don't do our work, so our solution is different than DELEC, yes, I agree.
And the other thing that kind of I envision, one of the disadvantages also, you are increasing the amount of packets size and stuff sending around for pretty much a lot of this the stuff if you implement that, because every time you have to then send the signature and the SVCB record for telling that you encrypted. And as long as the resolvers don't kind of understand that, they will get that every time, and they will every time kind of send the query to you and get the response back because they don't upgrade. I would suggest that if you are upgraded, you're no longer sending the stuff back, right? Anyway, but for the unupgraded, you have that.
Ralph, I agree. And that was one of the slides I skipped over. So yes, we are in agreement. We need some sort of opt-in, opt-out capability here, and we've already done that. True.
Thanks.
Hi guys, we're going to have to be fairly quick on the questions because we're running out of time.
Well, actually, mine's not very good. You go ahead. Good. Oh, okay. Well, I had two thoughts. One of them was that this is a nice way as well of withdrawing a transport. So if you want to take down DOQ because you've got a problem with DOQ, you can securely signal, please stop using DOQ, now use the second choice.
Thank you, sir.
Which is a good one.
That's a problem we have with the blind probing. If you're responding on the DOQ port, there's no way of saying, please don't use this.
Right. And the other thing was, again, as Ralph pointed out, like sending this extra SVCB for every response seems like a bit of an overhead, but you don't have to send it for every response. You could send it for some of them. You could not repeatedly send it to the same client or something. You could do something.
I completely agree, and we do that, and I was sort of running out of time for that slide.
This is going to have to be the last question. I'm really sorry. The rest of them will have to be answered in the channel.
All my fault. Yeah.
This is Mauricio Vergara from DigitalOcean. Is it my idea? I can see like a way of doing some sort of poisoning amplification attack using this based on the additional section that you're sending.
I haven't seen that, but on the other hand, I'm sort of blind. So perhaps there is an attack that I haven't figured out yet. I don't know. I haven't seen one. No.
Okay.
Thank you.
That would seem to be an invitation to devise attacks.
Please do.
Please thank you very much to Johan.